Hello and welcome. This is Jennifer. I'm so glad you're here. Today I have a shorter video for you. I know that's shocking. However, I wanted to share with you a pretty quick ink masking technique. I'm using embossed resist, and this is a great way to get more from your background stamps. I have two examples for you. Both of my cards feature the new Gina Floral Designs background stamp. I will be using it in my MISTI stamping tool. However, you could just lay the stamp upside down on your work surface, ink it up, and then press your cardstock onto it to get a good result. I have a note card that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, and I'm placing it onto my stamp. I do have a sticky mat in my stamping tool that will grab a hold of that card and hold it in place. This way I can be sure that I stamp nicely onto my card. I'm using an anti-static powder tool over the surface of the card because I plan to heat emboss and I want to get a crisp result. I'm inking up my stamp with VersaMark Ink, and then I'll press that firmly onto my card. Now, this is a technique you can do with any background stamp. If you do not have a background stamp, you could repeat stamp anything to cover the background. All right, so now I'm sprinkling on Gina Detail White Embossing Powder. Now, when we heat set this, it'll be white embossing powder on white cardstock, so you won't really see it. But when you tilt it in the light, you'll see the shine of that raised image. Now, I plan to add ink right to the front of this note card. Whenever I do any inking on the front of a note card, I like to put something on the back of it to protect it from getting inky. It's kind of a bummer when you create a card and the back of your card has ink all over it. So I cut a piece of Gina Masking Magic to be the same size as my card or slightly bigger. And I stick that piece on the back of my note card while I create. When I'm done creating, I'll take that piece off and save it for later and use it again. This is a great way to protect your card and get a nice clean result in the end. And by the way, that piece of masking paper can be used many times to protect card backings. All right, now let's do those stripes of color on the front of our card. I'm using the new Gina Designs Masking Magic Strips. This is brilliant because there are different size strips of masking paper in this package. There's a color coding so you know which ones are 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, and 1/2 inch. Now you could definitely cut your own strips if you want to. However, this is such a big time saver, as you'll see here. I'm starting out by putting 1/4 inch strips along the right and left and bottom front of our heat embossed note card. This will just mask off a little edge, which gives it a nice defined look in the end. So those masks will stay on the entire time. Now I'm starting in the bottom right corner and putting down strips right next to each other at a bit of an angle. Now I am not doing a pattern here, I'm just mixing up the different size strips, each time making sure that it's right up against the last strip that I put down, but they are not overlapping. You can see that by having these strips pre-cut, it's a time saver, but you can, again, cut your own. I do, however, highly recommend using Masking Magic from Gina It kind of has a coating on the top of it that prevents ink from seeping through, which is a big thing if you're doing a lot of inking. And they hold up enough that you can use the masking paper pieces more than once, which you'll see in a bit. Now up here at the top, I'm putting a bigger scrap of masking paper because I plan to stop my inking at that point. Now I'll hold this up so you can see all of those strips right up against each other. All right, now I did realize I only used one of the really narrow 1/8 inch strips, so I'm going to put one in down here. So I removed my mask, replaced it with one of these smaller ones, and then I'll fill it back up again. So these remove very easily. I've never had any tearing of my paper. Okay, so now this is all stuck to my desk, which is another bonus of using those strips. The strips hanging off the card will hold your card down as you do your inking. All right, now it's time to do our inking. You can use any dye inks for this. You could even use pigment inks. I'm using Gina inks today because her colors are just beautiful and they work great for this technique. I'm also using my Gina blending brushes, which I have in her brush stand. I did put a Lazy Susan on the bottom of the stand so that it'll spin around. I'll have a link to all of this below. So far I lifted the first strip, inked it with wild dandelion ink, and then put that strip back down. Then I lifted the second strip, which is that little narrow one, and over that opening, I'm putting a sweet mango ink, which is kind of an orangish yellow. And after I ink each time, I do buff it with a dry cloth. Then I put that strip back in place and move to the next one down. I remove that and I put a next color. Now I'm doing a rainbow order, but you could do any colors that you want. These colors are not overlapping. They're going up next to each other. So really you could do anything you want. If you want to overlap, that would also give a great result too. All right, so I just continue to do this, each time lifting up one of the masking strips, applying the ink, buffing it with a dry cloth, and then putting that strip back down and moving to the one below it. The reason I'm buffing it with a dry cloth is I'm removing the excess ink that may be sitting on top of the heat embossing. So the heat embossing is resisting the ink we put on top, but a little may sit on it. So to make our image bright white, we just wipe off the excess. Now these pieces of masking paper will be used again. You do not have to throw these away when you're done. Again, the masking magic really has a durability to it, and you can ink and stamp over it multiple times and it doesn't bleed through. By the way, I'm sorry for my voice. I'm recovering from being sick and it's just not back to normal yet. Okay, so I'm continuing to do this till I fill all the way into that bottom right corner. You could definitely do an entire background this way. You could do horizontal stripes, but I think there's something fun about these stripes at an angle. And it's more forgiving. You don't have to make sure that all of your strips are going down perfectly straight. Yes, I'm using a lot of different ink colors here. If your ink color selection is limited, try making your own color by putting down 2 ink colors on top of each other. Say put down a yellow and a Kelly green on top of each other and you'll end up with more of a lime green. So I'm done with the strips for this card, and I want to keep them so I can do this card again in the future or use them for a different technique. So I just peel them off and then stick them onto the front of my Masking Magic strip packaging. There are other ways you can save them. I do think this is the best because you know where they'll be. Now the bigger piece that's on the back of my card that's protecting it from getting inky, that one I actually stick to the inside of my cabinet door in my craft room so I can easily get to it anytime I want to protect the back of my card while I'm crafting. All right, so now we can remove the strips from around the outside edge, and you can see how it gives it a nice clean look. This looks like it has dimension to it, but it's perfectly smooth. For a sentiment, I'm using one of my all-time favorites from Gina, and this is the Hello from the Little Hello Layering Stencil Bundle. I just used the word hello alone, but there is a shadow die included if you wanted to use that. I also am using the Gina K Enjoyable Greetings stamp set. This one I use quite often. I like a lot of the small sentiments in here. They're great for sentiment strips. So I chose to use Sweet Friend, and I'll white heat emboss that on black cardstock. By the way, for my Hello die cuts and for this heat emboss sentiment, I'm using Tim Holtz black matte cardstock. I love this stuff for sentiments. It's super dark black and it's kind of got a smooth velvety look to it. It's gorgeous. And also, by the way, it foils really well. But here I'm just doing heat embossing. I'm putting Sweet Friend in the top corner of the scrap. Use my anti-static powder tool. And then I stamped it twice gently with VersaMark ink to get a nice crisp image. Then I'm adding that Gina K detail embossing powder in white. Tap off the excess and heat set that. Now this is my favorite way to create sentiment strips if you do not have a die. I've shown many ways to do this in the past, but this one I think works really well. So I have a scrap piece of cardstock here, that peach one, and I'll put it in my trimmer so that that straight edge there is right up against the blade of my trimmer where it will cut. So that's just a guide for me. I'll first put down my sentiment strip here that we want to cut. Then I'll put that guide on top of it, lining up that edge of that guide with our trimmer. So right where it's going to cut. Then I shift the sentiment around until I'm happy with the placement. So you can see the spacing there is just right. And that pink piece is a guide of where it will cut. Then I drop my blade and you can see how it cut my sentiment strip nicely. Then I use the trimmer to also cut the other ends. If you have a die to cut this, go for it. However, not everyone has one, so I like to show how to do so with a trimmer. I am putting 2 thin strips of black cardstock on the back of that sentiment strip. This will give it some strong dimension and it'll hold up nicely through the mail. By the way, the Hello die cut, I cut from the same Tim Holtz black cardstock, and I glued 2 of those together so it also has a bit of dimension. Now I'm gluing all of this onto our card. I'm using my Gina K Connect liquid adhesive, which is absolutely my favorite, and I've put it in a fine tip bottle, which makes it so easy to add to our tiny little die cuts. And I again am putting these at a bit of an angle to mimic the inking on the background. I will put something heavy on that while it dries, and while it is drying, we can stamp our matching envelope. I just take a piece of scrap cardstock and slide it under the flap of my envelope. This is a passionate pink envelope from Gina K. I love her envelopes and that they match her cardstocks and inks. I'm using that same stamp along with passionate pink ink to stamp on the flap alone. This is a great and quick way to make your envelope really match your card nicely. It really finishes it all off. Now that our card is complete, we can remove the masking paper from the back. And again, I'll save this and use it many times to protect the back of our cards. Oftentimes it's covered with ink, so I'm thankful I use it. So here's a closer look at that inking that we did over our heat embossing. So it's an embossed resist technique. You still have the white raised embossed image over the entire card, but the inking is only in that little area. This can be done with any background stamps, any colors of ink, and then you can put any sentiment you want to on there. You could use a holiday background and use a holiday sentiment. Anything works with this technique. That's why it's one of my favorites. And I will say those masking strips made it much faster to do, but you could cut your own. Now here is just a second version I wanted to show you. I used the Gina K Designs First Class Floral die set. This is a new one. There is a shadow die in the set, but I just used the main die itself and cut it from that Tim Holtz black cardstock. I again used that Sweet Friend sentiment and white heat embossed it on black cardstock and added it on top of our die cut. Now this time I did trim my inked piece down and raised it up on a note card, so there's a bit more dimension to this one. I could have instead done the masking on the edges like we did last time. It's nice to have different options. And I was able to reuse those masking strips for this card, the same ones I used before, and they're still holding up nicely, so I'll be able to use them again in the future. Before we go, I wanted to show one more die set that would be great for this card technique. It would be great on that pop of color. This is the Gina K Fresh Cut Flowers die set. I think this one will be really popular. There are those flower dies, the shadow dies, then leaves, and the shadow leaves. So I think it'd be neat to use this flower right here from black cardstock and put it on that colorful striped background. You could even use those strips of masking paper to mask off different sections of this die cut and do different petals, different colors. So there's a lot you can do with this particular technique. We'll link to the supplies that I use below, but I did want to mention if you like shorter videos, this one's a bit shorter for me, but if you like 5-minute videos, I recommend checking out Gina K Designs 5-minute video playlist. She is able to pack a lot of creativity into a short time. They're definitely worth binge watching. I'll link to her playlist here. I'll also link to another inking video in case you want more inspiration. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again very soon.